Welcome to True Crime Bites, Death Row and Executions, where we honor lives lost and revisit the final chapters of those who crossed the line. On June 25th, 2025, after nearly half a century of legal twists, retrials, plea deals, and overturned sentences, Mississippi will carry out the execution of Richard Jordan, its oldest and longest-serving death row inmate. His journey to the execution chamber spans almost 50 years, 4 death sentences, and a case so convoluted that even seasoned legal scholars shake their heads at the trail of appeals. But at the center of this long legal saga is one irreversible truth: the violent death of a 34-year-old mother named Edwina Marter, whose life was stolen in a chilling plot fueled by greed and desperation. This is the haunting story of a crime that echoed through time, and the execution that will finally close the book. Later in this video, you'll hear Richard Jordan speak for himself, offering an apology to the victim's family and claiming he never intended for someone to die. I've told a lot of stories here. Some are terrifying, others deeply tragic. And this one feels like standing at the edge of a decades-old storm, watching it finally settle after nearly half a century. And while the world moved on, the people at the heart of this crime never got to press pause. Not the family, not the victim, and definitely not Richard Gerald Jordan. This case makes you question not just justice, but time itself. Richard Gerald Jordan was born on May 25, 1946, in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and raised in the nearby small town of Petal. To those who knew him growing up, Jordan didn't stand out in any alarming way. He was considered a good kid, polite and respectful, and graduated from Petal High School without incident. What followed was a chapter that, for many, leaves lasting scars. Jordan joined the U.S. Army and served 3 tours in Vietnam. According to those who advocate against his execution, Jordan came back from Vietnam deeply changed. One account suggests that the trauma of war haunted him long after the uniform came off. Whether those psychological wounds played a role in what he would later do is a question that will likely go unanswered. But what's certain is that Jordan never quite found stable footing again. He bounced from job to job, worked briefly in Louisiana, and by the mid-1970s was married with 3 children and deeply in debt. By January 1976, he was out of money, out of options, and making plans not for recovery, but for ransom. Richard Jordan didn't pick his target at random. He wanted money, and fast. So he called Gulf National Bank in Gulfport and asked to speak to the person in charge of commercial loans. He got a name: Chuck Marter, a high-ranking loan officer. Then, using a Gulfport telephone directory, Jordan located the Marter family's home address. He drove there with a dark plan in mind. On January 12, 1976, Jordan approached the home posing as an electric company worker needing to check circuit breakers. Inside were Edwina Marter, 34 years old, and her 3-year-old son fast asleep. Her husband Chuck was at work. Their older son was at catechism class. Jordan abducted Edwina, leaving the sleeping toddler behind. He forced her into a vehicle and drove to the DeSoto National Forest. There, deep among the pines and shadows, he pulled a .38 caliber pistol and fatally shot her once in the head. Jordan would later claim that Edwina had tried to run, and he fired over her head, accidentally hitting her. The state, however, maintained a very different picture. Evidence showed she had been kneeling, shot at close range in an execution-style killing. But as cold-blooded as the murder was, it was only the beginning. After murdering Edwina, Jordan went to the movies. He watched Death Wish, a vigilante revenge thriller, a choice almost too ironic to be real. Then later that same day, he picked up a phone and called Chuck Marter. With calculated cruelty, he told Chuck that Edwina was alive and demanded $50,000 for her safe return. Law enforcement was immediately involved, and Chuck Marter, reeling in panic and grief, followed the kidnapper's instructions. But Jordan was cautious. He monitored the drop site from the forest and, seeing police presence, refused to retrieve the money. The next day, he called back, lowering the ransom to $25,000 and issuing new instructions, this time including multiple decoy turns to lose any possible police tail. But this time, the FBI and sheriff's deputies were ready. At 9 a.m. on January 13th, Chuck left the money near Interstate 10 and Canal Road. When Jordan arrived, undercover officers moved in. Jordan tried to flee, crashing one police vehicle into a ditch and speeding away under gunfire. He evaded capture for a few hours, until a taxi driver unknowingly drove him straight into the hands of police. At 1 p.m., officers pulled him from the cab, recovered most of the ransom money, and took Jordan into custody. He confessed to the crime and led officers to Edwina's body and the murder weapon. When I first read about how Jordan calmly watched Death Wish before calling in the ransom, my stomach turned. The sheer coldness of that moment, the ability to sit in a theater while a woman lay dead in the woods, it's one of those details that lingers. It's not just the act, it's the attitude. And I think that's what makes this story so difficult to process. It wasn't heat-of-the-moment rage. It was methodical. It was planned. Jordan was first tried in July 1976. The verdict, guilty. The sentence, death. But Mississippi's mandatory death penalty statute was soon ruled unconstitutional, and Jordan was granted a new trial in 1977. That time, the jury deliberated for just hours before handing down a second death sentence. Then in 1983, that sentence was vacated due to improper jury instructions. A third sentencing hearing resulted in, yet again, a death sentence. But even that wouldn't stand. This cycle repeated itself like a grim legal carousel. Each time the state sentenced Jordan to die, his attorneys found constitutional cracks to exploit. His fourth death sentence didn't arrive until 1998, 22 years after the original crime. And by then, Jordan was already something of a legal enigma, a man condemned to die who repeatedly dodged execution not through innocence but through technicalities. I'll be honest, when I went down the rabbit hole of this case, I got dizzy just trying to track every overturned sentence in legal technicality. It made me wonder, how do we balance a flawed legal system with a very clear act of guilt? The truth is, justice isn't just about process. It's also about consequences. And after 49 years, I don't think anyone expected this case to still be open. In 1991, prosecutors attempted to bring the long saga to an end. They offered Jordan a plea deal, life without parole, on the condition he'd never appeal his sentence again. Jordan agreed, but then he appealed again. He argued that Mississippi law in 1976 did not allow life without parole for first-time capital defendants, making his sentence technically illegal. The courts agreed not to commute his sentence to life with parole, but to throw it out entirely. And so, in 1998, Richard Gerald Jordan returned to court for yet another sentencing hearing, and once more was sentenced to death. While Jordan's legal roller coaster has made headlines for decades, it's easy to forget the life that was lost in the shadows of courtroom transcripts. Edwina Marter was 34 years old, a wife and mother of 2 young boys. Her death was more than tragic. It was the kind of nightmare from which her family would never fully wake. One of her sons was only 3 years old when she was taken. Another was at church class. In one instant, their lives were cleaved in two by a man who didn't know them, didn't care to, only saw them as a means to a financial end. Edwina never had the chance to grow old, to watch her children grow up, to become a grandmother. Her life ended alone, terrified, in a forest. That truth can't be overturned. As we talk about the courtroom drama and appeals, I want to take a moment to refocus on Edwina. She wasn't just a name in a case file. She was a mother, a wife, a neighbor. I try to imagine what her last moments were like, And honestly, it's unbearable. She was caught in a situation she never asked for and never had a chance to survive. We owe it to her not to let her memory get lost in all the legal noise. Jordan's appeals didn't stop with sentencing. He and other inmates have repeatedly challenged Mississippi's execution methods, specifically the lethal injection protocol. Questions arose over the use of midazolam, a sedative that some say doesn't render prisoners fully unconscious before the painful drugs kick in. Legal challenges to Mississippi's drug cocktail, supply shortages, and court rulings effectively froze executions for over a decade. But in October 2024, the Mississippi Attorney General's office finally filed a motion to set an execution date. On May 1, 2025, the state Supreme Court agreed. Richard Gerald Jordan would be executed on June 25, 2025. At 79 years old, Richard Jordan has lived longer than most of the people he once shared death row with. His life has been filled with second, third, and fourth chances, all granted not for redemption, but due to legal maneuvers. The execution of Richard Jordan will close a 49-year chapter in Mississippi's criminal justice history. But the wounds left behind, especially for the Marter family, never had the luxury of delay. Justice delayed is not always justice denied, but it is always justice tested. For Edwina Marter, this execution may be the closest thing to closure her family will ever receive. Jordan ended Edwina's life in seconds, but somehow the system gave him nearly 50 years to reflect on it. It's a case where time itself became part of the punishment. And then there's Edwina, whose future ended the moment she opened her front door. It's not a story of redemption, it's a story of grief, and maybe finally of closure.
My time in Vietnam is, we did what I and a lot of other folks did what we had to do. And maybe hindsight now, you can argue was right or wrong or whatever. But the point is, we did it, and we did the best we could under the circumstances. As far as the family goes, as I said to the family, I'm sorry for what I did. I'm really, truly sorry. It goes against everything that I was taught as a child. It goes against everything I have known as a young adult. And it goes even what I learned in Vietnam. I never intended for someone to die. They did. I can only say that I'm sorry and I'm regretful for what I did. I would say to the governor, I will continue to help in any way that I can other folks, both in the prison, the staff at the prison, and in the outside world. I will continue to work as long as the body holds up. If you commute my sentence or do whatever, you will not regret it. I will never give you an opportunity to say, I wish I had not done that.
Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, consider subscribing. Hit the like button if you believe that every victim's voice deserves to be heard, and leave a comment below with your thoughts on justice, redemption, and what it really means to find peace. As always, stay curious and stay safe.